Hi, welcome to Nothing Venture, Nothing Game. I'm your host with the most, your GM Jared, and today I'm joined by Steve.
Yo.
And the reason why I'm joined by Steve is because Steve's angry, and you won't like it when Steve is mad. He's full of rage, and that's what we're talking about on this episode of Rules with Steve. Rage and how it works with other aspects of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So stick around and I guess grab some heavy armor, maybe some Kevlar, so that you don't get hit with that angry barbarian rage. This episode was actually generated. The idea came from a Facebook. As we lurk on the Facebooks, we're part of the Pathfinder 2nd Edition group, and Steve saw a comment, and basically the comment said, "Hey, I'm a X-level barbarian, and I was given the free dedication, and I took the Magus or Magus,
or the other way around. They were the Magus, and Barbarian dedication. Some where they got Magus and Barbarian combined together.
Yes. So everyone started, and people were asking like, how does it work with rage? So Steve, why don't you walk us through rage and how it interacts with magic stances and like concentration, stuff like that?
So the major question that came from the initial post was, to clarify, Magus has a stance that you can enter to get kind of bonus damage. So we kind of have to talk about what stances mean and how they function. And we're also talking about the rage action that the Barbarian has. The Magus has a stance called Arcane Cascade. I'm actually reading it right now. And it has a bunch of traits, which is Concentrate. It's got the Magus trait because only Maguses get it at the moment. And it's a stance. So it has those three traits. So stances are something you take an action in, or however many actions the stance requires, and you enter that stance. And you stay in that stance. You don't have to keep taking actions to maintain it. It's not like a spell you're sustaining. You just stay in that stance so long as you maintain the requirements. Now, some stances don't have requirements, and some stances do have requirements. The thing is, they'd never clarified with the Magus stance, the way it reads, the requirements can technically never be fulfilled. That's a separate thing, but the requirements are you used your most recent action to cast a spell or make a spell strike, which is an ability that the Magus has, which we're not going to get into. But so to enter the stance, you spend an action, and if your last action was to cast a spell or use that ability, you can enter the stance. And the stance gives you bonus damage and adds some extra stuff. Now we're going to switch over to rage. Now the rage action gives you a whole bunch of stuff. And its requirements are you aren't fatigued and you aren't raging. Simple enough. It's got the Barbarian. It's got the Concentrate trait to it. Some people don't actually notice that the rage actually has a Concentrate trait. It's got emotion and mental, and it's not a stance, unlike the Arcane Cascade. And basically, you gain some temporary hit points. It lasts a minute, and it's not or until you fall into. You can't stop on your own. You can't stop like, oh, I think I'm not going to be mad anymore right now. No, you rage till the end of the duration. You fall unconscious. Or I believe that you can't see any enemies. Perceive is what they use. And you get +2 damage. And this is not including Barbarian instances. We're not getting too particular with this. It's just the base level of rage. You get +2 additional damage. You get a -1 penalty to AC. And here's the important point. You can't take actions. Specifically, you cannot take actions with the Concentrate trait unless they also have the Rage trait. And it specifically says you can seek while raging because seek also has the Concentrate trait. Barbarians have a way of getting around this. There's a feat that they can take if they choose to that kind of gets around this. But we're assuming that this person does not have that feat. For those of you know, that it's Moment of Clarity is the feat that kind of gets around the idea of not being able to use Concentrate actions. But it specifically says you can't use actions with the Concentrate trait. Now, if you do this in the right order, if you enter the Arcane Cascade, so obviously you had to cast a spell, and most spells have the verbal and somatic. So verbal component is I speak the words, And yet again, it's kind of this thing with Pathfinder. There's things that are nested inside of other things. So the verbal component has the concentrate trait attached to it. Somatic is moving with your hands, and that has a manipulate trait, which is something but the Barbarian doesn't say anything about that. So technically, the Barbarian, while raging, can cast spells so long as they don't have verbal components. Right? So that's easy enough for them to do. Most spells do have it, though. If I decide as a magus that I want to enter the Arcane Cascade, so I cast a spell, ooh, magic. And then I'll go, okay, now I enter my stance. Okay, great. Now I'm in the stance. Now I choose to rage. I haven't actually broken any rules yet. Now, at this point, I can no longer take any actions that have the concentrate trait, unless they also have the rage trait. The requirements don't say anything about constantly having to cast spells. It doesn't say you have to spend an action every turn to stay in the stance. So you're actually not actually taking any actions that have the concentrate trait, even though it has it in the action itself. It's not that you can't do concentrate, because in essence, if you couldn't maintain actions that had the concentrate trait, rage ends as soon as you start, because it also has the concentrate trait and it doesn't have the rage trait, which is kind of funny.
So, Steve, you were speaking about how it's a specific order that allows you to do this situation. So that order is you cast a spell to activate your Arcane Cascade. Then you activate your Arcane Cascade, and while that is activated, I then rage. So my very last action, I spend my entire turn, right? So I cast a one-action spell or I spell strike to activate my Arcane Cascade, and then while that is activated, I then maybe on my next turn, then I activate Rage, and then while I'm in Rage, it doesn't boot me out because the Mega Stance doesn't have the Arcane Cascade doesn't have the sustain feature built in, because you would have to waste an action to sustain it. And we know you don't have to do that. Once you're in it, you're in it.
Just like any stance, you're in it until the requirements, like you're no longer meeting the requirements, and that kicks you out. You decide to stop, and then you can choose to do that, or the fight is over, and stances only can be done in encounter mode.
In encounter mode, yes, that's the most important part. You can only maintain the stance. Well, that's if you're not homebrewing it, right? Like a lot of times.
Yeah, this is just per Pathfinder 2nd edition rules as of right now.
So if let's say I'm said barbarian, right? I'm angry, and I took Megas because I'm also a smart barbarian, and that's perfectly fine. Play to your strengths, and I do the correct order of operations, right? So I did my PEMDAS, and I get to the specific spot where now I'm raging and I'm still sustaining, not actively, but I am sustaining the Arcane Cascade.
Yeah, you're in your stance.
I'm in my stance. I have Inexorable Iron, right? So that is the one I like. So at the start of my turns, I regain hit points because I got this two-handed weapon, and no one expects
hit points specifically.
Temporary hit points, yes. Now here is the caveat, right? So this is the important thing. One, temporary hit points do not stack. You always take the highest amount. So theoretically, if I rage, that gives me temporary hit points. But it's a way to game the system to keep getting temporary hit points, because if I got hit my last turn, I theoretically might be out of temporary hit points, and now I'm just restacking them up, which is great, right?
Yes, because the rage, the temporary hit points from rage don't come back without feats. We're talking about just regular. They don't come back without feats, so most likely that's going to be the greater value until you get hit. And then the inexorable iron, in this case, we're saying in this particular scenario, every turn you're going to gain back a small amount of hit points because you're in the stance and you're wielding a two-handed weapon.
Yep. And now I say to my GM or my DM, I'm going to use my focus point to do Thunderous Strike. And I look at the tags and I say, hey, it's only Evocation, Magus, and Sonic. So that means I'm loud. I'm being loud. And it's only one action cast, but it has verbal. Am I allowed to do that, GM?
So based on everything here, you can't actually cast a verbal-based spell because verbal has the concentrate trait attached to it, which would be taking an action with a concentrate trait, which Rage says you can't do.
You can't, unless I took that specific feat, but that's besides the point. So as per Raw, I have to PEMDAS my way into the specific build. I have to, or a specific order of operation. I have to cast spell, activate my Arcane Cascade, which gets me into my stance. And then once I'm in my stance, I then activate Rage. So basically, I'm spending a full turn or possibly turn and a half to activate my full character or the character build I have in my head. And we are not arguing whether or not that is the most optimal. It's
we're not talking about how mechanically beneficial this is, but it is something you can do. And I just wasn't able to comment on, and we wasn't able to have the discussion. Now, like I said, back and forth. I wouldn't have minded going back and forth with people, but the thread had gotten locked before I was able to respond and to have that discussion. So we're having it here.
Yes, we're having it here. And I learned something. As a GM, I didn't know. Like, I assumed, and I think this was the situation, right? So now we're just kind of talking. I would always make the assumption, and this is my fault, right? I'm making assumptions. And since, we all learn as kids, what happens when you make an assumption? You make an ass out of you and me. So I would assume I rage, and that boots me out of everything because it's like an explosive feature, right? So, and then I think a lot of people think of rage as like the Incredible Hulk. The mindless Hulk, not Endgame Hulk, where it's intelligent Hulk, right? So it's I'm so angry I can't focus on anything, and theoretically that's true, but because we are following the rules as written, it makes sense. So now I think this would come to a point where you would want to speak to your GM and not come to your GM in a situation like this where you're like, no. As rules is written, I'm allowed to be a ginormous idiot and do all this stuff. And I'm not calling the person an idiot. I think what they're trying to do is what they're trying to do. I do stupid things all the time. But that would create a bit of a negative space. And you would want to avoid that negative space by just simply talking to your GM and then having that conversation. Now, so if Steve came to me and said, hey, man, I want to do this. And I said, I don't think you can because rage, then we would have to flip the books. But now we're doing this for you. So you don't have to flip books. You can just Google it. Hopefully we pop up. You like and subscribe. And then you learn very quickly that you're allowed to game the system. And that's what we're really all trying to do. Just game the system. Yeah.
And like I said, and it also goes back, like you said, talking to your GM of how people understand rage. Now, the thing is that unlike other games now, in older versions of D&D, I believe in like first or second edition D&D, like the Berserker class, like literally was like a blind rage, and you couldn't tell friend or foe. And that was the thing that I think that used to be a mechanic to where, but this doesn't say that. This is like you're raging, and it does say, and this is kind of where the little bit of the lore that they give you with rage, a little flavor text, and the actual abilities that it grants you don't match up. And this happens from time to time in Pathfinder where it gives you like a little flair of how you can think of the ability, but then that doesn't really mate up with how it can be used based on the rules. Because it says you tap your inner fury, and you begin raging, and then you gain a whole bunch of mechanical benefits. Yeah, you can't voluntarily stop raging, and that's basically all the flavor. So it sounds like sounds like like Hulk is strongest ever, right? And it just sounds like I'm an unstoppable rage machine, but I can choose to walk up. I could choose to tactically make decisions, and I don't have to like always go to the shortest possible route. I could decide to walk around. If I know the monster's got an attack of opportunity, I could walk around and plan my route accurately, and I can flank with my rogue buddy, and I can know that the wizard's about to cast a fireball, so I know maybe not to get into that next to that enemy there. I'm going to go over here. So you still have options for your character to make intelligent decisions. Also, we all have to be on an agreement of what raging really means. If you want to make rage like you're an unstoppable like Hulk monster, go for it. It's just not saying you can't. It's just saying it's based on the rules. People sometimes think rage and apply mechanics to it that aren't there.
Yeah. Like you were speaking, like I could tactically choose to disengage, like take a 5 step and then take my move. So I spend an action to take a step and then an action to move, and then, move to wherever I need to go, flank with my rogue buddy, and then attack and get that flanking bonus. If rage was that just flat blind rage, I would feel it would state like you're not allowed to take step. You can't if you're not attacking, then stuff has to happen. Where
or it's almost like in like the D&D 5th edition, they state that if you're raging and you don't make an attack or you don't take damage, your rage just ends. Right. This one lasts a set number of rounds.
Yeah. So after learning about this, there was a few things like you said, like it's understanding rage and talking about how your character does their rage. That's something to talk about with your character development. Obviously, if you're just doing kind of like a murder hobo situation, then like you want to just speak to your GM because they might want to have that conversation. Like, why are you building like this? Like,
and then I'll just make sure that everyone's on the same page on how abilities interact. And this could not necessarily just be about rage and the Magus. Oh, I lost it. Arcane Cascade, which is the Magus stance, because I looked at a lot of other stances, and only this one had concentrate. At least as far as I could tell. Probably because it has magic involved in it in some way, and that's how they're using that to mechanically state that. Because it's not actually a spell, but it's working with magic. Yeah. But yet again, it's just so long as everyone's on the same page, I don't see anything wrong with this. Because, like I said, raging along with Magus beyond the first round, and now you have this extra bonus damage, which I believe stacks together because they're both not typed. It's just extra damage. Yeah. That. Beyond that, the Magus is all about casting spells and attacking with your weapon with spells, which is something the Barbarian is not capable of doing while they're raging, unless they take extra options. Yeah, and then that just but like you could do the Magus and a monk and have multiple different stances. You could actually do Barbarian, because we looked into this. The Barbarian can use the gravity weapon feature from the Ranger. Yeah, the Ranger abilities, even though they're focus spells, the gravity weapon is somatic. It's not verbal, and somatic does not have that's manipulate versus concentrate. So you can cast that while raging. Yeah, so while raging, let me just double check that actually. Yeah. Wow. So you can use the gravity weapon feat with the rage. So you could already be raging and then activate it. And your GM's like, wait, you just casted a spell, you need that special ability, and then you're like, oh, well, let me explain. Because it's somatic, I don't have to concentrate. There's no concentration feature on somatic spells. So technically, I'm not breaking rage. And then your GM might be like, well, wait. But it's also fun. Like now you could talk to your GM and say, well, now I'm just laying haymakers, like with my weapon. Like if I'm using a greatsword, I'm throwing my back into each swing. And you're building this concept of like, I'm using it mathematically to get bonuses, but it's actually really just my anger, right? And then you might be a giant totem, so you're using this very large weapon, and you're no longer swinging with accuracy. You're now just swinging with that primal fury. So again, talk to your GM, figure it out, ask questions. If you have any more questions, leave a question below in the comments so we can make more videos with Rules with Steve, because we are out there secretly lurking. But in closing, Steve, do you have anything else to say with this rule? No. And I was just going to say that in the Facebook post, there's no one being mean. I just think that it was a misunderstanding of how everything was functioning. And we're not just like, no, we're right and you're wrong. We're not trying to do that. I just happened to see a conversation happen, and I'm like, let me look that up, because now I'm interested. And it turns out that I didn't think it worked the way people were saying it worked. So this is not an attack on anybody. We're just trying to clarify stuff, at least as far as we understand it. But if we got something wrong, or if I think it was the conversation of like how rage interacts just besides the concept of rage. Like it was also a mental hurdle for people to kind of get behind. Yeah. Like it doesn't make sense. Like the Barbarian casting spells doesn't make sense. So that's just a hurdle to get behind, unless you're playing first edition, and then you could be the Battle Rager. Blood Rager. That's right. This is a note to Paizo. Make that as an archetype. Blood Rager. Make that as a dedication. That would be a cool dedication. The Blood Rager they casted spells. It was kind of like a hybrid Barbarian. It was a Barbarian sorcerer hybrid. Yeah, it was a pretty cool class. But with that being said, we don't want to take up any more of your time. Hopefully you enjoyed this little brief stint with Rules with Steve.
I'm GM Jared, and that's your rules arbiter, Steve. Bye, everyone.
Good night.